Hello and welcome to another Hidden Her Stories podcast. And today we have got Nikki Vallance, who is a writer and also a coach. She works with aspiring writers and established writers, and she's also a blog writer. So welcome, Nikki. Thank you for
Hello.
joining us today. And so we're going to be talking about Nikki's book. You can actually see the cover behind me. It's called Pivotal, and it was Nikki's debut book. So we're going to be talking to her about how she went about the process of writing the book, finding out a little bit more about the story. And then we're going to be talking about three very quite well-known literary women who have inspired Nikki. We're not going to say who they are yet, but the general theme for today's chat is it's never too late to be who you want to be. And that is a quote from someone very famous, a literary feminine author, a female author. So we'll be talking about the inspiration for Nikki's writing. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nikki, and then I think she'll sort of fill us in a little bit more. But Nikki actually worked for about 20 years, was it, Nikki, in
Yes.
finance recruitment
Yeah.
before becoming an author. And I think if you go and have a look at her website, nikkivallance.com, Nikki's always wanted to be a writer. I think it was something that, you always wanted to do from quite an early age, like a
Yes.
lot of writers, but you just never ever really got the opportunity to do it. And you ended up in this career in finance, a very corporate professional career. So
Yeah.
how did you make that transition from this career to finally, saying, I want to be a writer, I'm actually going to do it? And how did you make that transition, and how did you sit down and actually write that book and do what you wanted to do? Because I think it's fantastic, and my listeners and viewers would love to know, what it takes to make that leap from, a full-time job, but I want to be a writer. How do you do it?
Yeah. Okay. So there is a bit of a bridge between the two. It wasn't completely a leap off the cliff. So whilst I was working in my full-time recruitment job, my sister suggested that I go and check out this thing called coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because she thought I was a natural coach. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't really know what it was then. Back in those days, people thought coaching was, whenever I said I was a coach, they would say, oh, is that for netball or something?
Yes, I think it's to do with sport, don't they? They don't
Yeah,
realise people need
exactly.
coaching in their lives, in their hobby, whatever you do. You need sometimes you need somebody professional to help you do it.
Exactly. So she suggested I go and look at it, and I did, and I thought, well, yes, this is something I really want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was running my coaching business alongside my full-time career and my family and everything else, but I was focusing mostly on career coaching and business coaching because that sort of sat quite well with recruitment. And most of my clients and my candidates, when I was recruiting, would say, gosh, you seem a bit different. You're not a normal recruiter. And I'd say, well, I've got this interest in coaching. I do it on the side of my job, but I do it because I really love to help people find their sort of true potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realised, having had some coaching myself, that if I wanted to make changes, that actually having a coach is the best way of doing it, because you could spend years doing it on your own, but having that coach there to support you, encourage you, challenge you, keep you accountable, helps you actually get there quicker, basically.
I absolutely 100% agree, and I was actually going to sort of slip into the show how I met you, but I think actually now is the time to do that. Because Nikki and I met when we were actually on a training course together, and that training course was run by Lauren Sheeran, who's a menopause coach, and she's actually going to be a guest on the podcast later on this month, and I'm actually going to be on her podcast as well. So there's a really nice connection. And as you say, at the time I was in my mid-50s, I'd been a freelancer working in photography, doing lots of different things, traveling around, and I was getting to the stage where it was fine when I was doing that in my 40s and my kids were off doing their own thing, and then my sort of kids landed back on me, and all of a sudden I thought, hang on a minute, I have to be a mum now, I'm a grandma as well, and I just wasn't happy with what I was doing, and yeah, there was a lot of things happening in my life. And at that time, we were in the middle of the pandemic as well, weren't we, Nikki?
Yeah.
So, you know,
Oh,
there was
really?
these massive things going on in the world outside. And personally for me, my whole world, because I was realizing that, you know, I needed to stop what I was doing. I needed to change my job. You know, I wasn't happy. I needed to find some outlet for this creativity, and also I was going through the menopause and the pandemic, so it was like this crazy like midlife crisis. But you know, I was just carrying on, and nobody really knew. It was all going on in my head.
Yeah.
And then I ended up on this menopause course because I needed some, you know, I didn't feel physically and mentally healthy, and I needed a change. And I was also writing my first book, wasn't I, Nikki?
Yeah.
Based on 30 years of my family history. So I'd waited a long time, and but the lockdown came, and I thought this is the time to do it. But I really felt, you know, we all have this. Whenever we make big changes, we all kind of feel that imposter syndrome. Can I do this? Am I good enough? You know, am I being completely crazy? So yeah, I was going through all those things, and they were the things I realized that had, you know, held me back. And I think, you know, when Nikki and I were on the course, we all had some wonderful chats, didn't we? And I suddenly realized, you know, I was talking to I was listening to Nikki one evening, and I realized that, you know, nobody has life sewn up, you know, and it was actually really nice to feel like I wasn't the only woman going through this, and that even successful writers, you know, people who've had their books published, were still having these doubts about themselves. And it was just the support and the advice that I got from yourself. There was another lady on the course with us who was also a coach, was wonderful, and from Lauren. And you know, it really helped me. And as you say, you know, if you have that support network with people who have maybe gone through that process, whatever you're wanting to change in your life, it's important to have people there. And you know, and you get some affirmation whether you're doing the right things, and also you're having to be accountable to people. So I think, you know, coaching is a fantastic thing. And it's the way I look at it is, some people need therapy because they're working through problems, but if you feel like you want to proceed in a positive way, you go for coaching. Coaching is a kind of really positive therapy for me. And it helped me to achieve my goals. And it helps you, you know, it's easy to say I have a goal, I want to write a book, but you have to learn the steps, and you know, how are you going to achieve that, and you have to break it down. And I think in your coaching work, that's really what you do, isn't it, with a lot of the people you work with now, as in your writing coaching?
Yes, absolutely. So what happened was, when I decided that I took a coach and decided I was going to start writing my book, I didn't really know that that's what I was going to do. I said to her, look, I've got two other goals, which are really sort of sensible, target-driven goals. And my whole life is sort of target-driven and really quite sort of heavy. And I said, look, I'm going to have one more goal, and it's going to be completely free. And she said, that's absolutely fine. It's your time with me. You can do what you like. And so the first day I said, look, it's just going to be about creativity. I just need to get more creativity back into my life. I know it makes me feel good. By the next week, I said, I think I've decided what it is. I'm going to write a book. By the next week, it was, no, I've decided, I know what the book's going to be about. It's a novel, and I'm going to publish it. So within 2 weeks, I've gone from an unstructured, I'm just going to do something creative, to here we go, this is the thing I've always wanted to do. And as you say, it's there, but you have to let it out. And I think that process helped me to do that. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for coaching. But what happened was, when I decided that was what I was going to do, I also then decided to shift my focus in my coaching business to help other people who wanted to write. So rather than having my job and my coaching as one thing and then my writing as another, I thought, well, I'm going to put them both together. And eventually I was in a position to be able to say, look, I don't have to do my full-time job anymore. I can do my coaching effectively full-time and then write alongside that. So it all came together over a period of years. It didn't happen overnight. So I think you asked me how long did it take me, and how did I do it? The first part of writing the book was really easy, because I had, in a flash of inspiration whilst I was being coached, I had that's what my book is going to be about. And it's basically got 4 strands to it, 4 different characters who are all posed with the same life-changing dilemma. And that whole premise, the whole arc of the story, and what the the reveal is at the end, the twist is at the end, that came in fully formed in one idea with the 4 characters, just like that in my head.
That's amazing. That's really like, that's something like Agatha Christie, you know, you'd worked out the twist in the end, and then the rest of the book was kind of, you know,
fill it in, you make it happen.
I love
exactly.
that idea.
So that was quite good, but on the other hand, everyone said, when are you going to finish it? And I said, well, it's in my head. And they said, that's no good, you've got to get it out onto paper.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
At some point, and I say this to people now when they ask me, because I went to a book club last night, and I went to talk to the women who'd chosen to read my book, which was, you know, fantastic of them. And I said, look, I'm happy to come along and talk to you about it.
Wow.
And they said, how long did it take you to write? And my answer now, looking back, is it took me 9 years from the first word written to the final one of the first draft, which is not the end of the writing of the book, by the way, but that's the end of the kind of storytelling part. So 9 years, but I say it took me basically a year to write. It took me 5 years of life getting in the way, and it took me 3 years of doubt, because there is huge amount of doubt when you're certainly when you're doing it for the first time. You have no idea what you're doing. You don't know whether it's any good. You've got all these voices in your head, teachers, friends, family. Some of them might be positive, but some of them aren't, and you're carrying all that weight around with you. And what I say to my clients now is, you need to find a way to put that to one side. Do it anyway. Don't worry about the quality. Nobody's first draft is good. I mean, it might be nearly there, but it's never going to be the final thing. So don't worry about the quality. Don't worry about repeating yourself, or it not being in the right order, or the prose not being right, or the grammar. Don't worry about it. Get it out onto paper. That's
absolutely. I think that is one of the most valuable tips, I think, that, you know, any writer can be given, because I experienced that when I started writing my book. It was going to be a story about my granddad's life, and then I thought, well, I can't write about my granddad's life without writing about my mum's life, and then my dad's life and how they met. And so this book kind of evolved from being a very short sort of little book that I was going to write for my mum about my granddad, who was a fireman during the Blitz, into this massive, like, epic family saga. And you know, and it kept evolving, and it kept growing like a child. And it, you know, it started out as one idea, and it just evolved and sort of changed into different ideas. And then and it was just literally, where do I start? And when you have, you know, I did 30 years of research, and I had all these documents, I had, you know, all these notes that I'd made, and it was, okay, so you're going to write a book, but it's a factual book, but it tells a story. So you just have to start somewhere, with a sentence, with a line. And the day that I opened the laptop up and typed that first line, and it's changed, you know, since. But it is, you just have to get, and once you get something there, you've got, you know, it's something to hook everything else on, even if it's just one paragraph, your introduction, or, you know, a summing up of what the book is about. At least you've made that start, and it will just grow. And I found times, I mean, maybe you found this, Nikki, but yeah, I'd be writing, and I literally would be transported back into my childhood, and I'd be seeing colours and hearing and smelling. And, you know, it is actually, I found it a really, really cathartic thing, because I was writing about the past. I learned a lot of things, because I've interviewed my mum, and that actually brought us closer together. You know, talking to her, and that during the lockdown, it was really good, because it kind of connected us. It gave her a reason to ring me every week, and then we would chat, and then I'd go away thinking, wow, my mum's like really amazing. I never knew this, I never knew that. And then we kind of looked at our lives as women in different decades, and so I was learning all of this stuff. So when you are writing, you'll learn about yourself, you'll learn about the characters you're creating, if you're writing a novel, and if you're writing a non-fiction book, you'll become immersed in that subject. And once you get into that zone, it's great then, because like ideas start flowing, don't they, Nikki? But I think, you know, that bit of advice is just, if you want to write a book, just write, you know, get a pen, paper, write the first sentence, get your Word document. You know, once you've started it, that's it. You have to start it. That's the whole point. It can be up here for years, can't it?
Yes,
you know?
exactly. So in the end, it was sort of quite a smooth transition, but at the time it never feels like that, does it? When you're making a change, it never feels like that. So and actually, again, when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking about what the theme's going to be and what will people ask me about it and all this, but actually looking back, it's really obvious that what matters to me is is women of our age,
Yeah.
being in a good place and getting themselves there, and all my characters have to go through that sort of transformation and make those decisions. But more than that, I was really fascinated, and have always been fascinated by what makes us who we are, and what decisions we've made that get us to be where we're at. And you know, are those things that would have happened anyway? I mean, the sort of destiny, you know, kind of
I'm gonna have to buy a copy of your book on Kindle, because the more I'm learning about your book, as I'm sort of I really feel an affinity to especially a couple of the characters in your book. So I have actually got it on my wish list, and when I get paid, I'm going to get a copy, because I do really feel that, you know, I need to read this book, because like you say, you know, when we get to, I think for me it's when I got to my 50s. When I was in my 30s, I was in a sort of marriage that wasn't very good and wasn't very happy, but you know, I went to university, got a degree, came out of that, became a different person, but I was still a mom. Then, you know, had terrible trauma in my life, everything fell apart, lost everything. In my 40s, I picked myself up, went off and had adventures and learned, you know, who I was. And then in my 50s, you know, I actually looked back and thought, well, actually, the person that went off and had those adventures was doing that because of things that happened earlier in my life. And when you get to your 50s, this whole thing for me about, you know, changing your life and who do you want to be, I was asking myself those questions. What, you know, why am I not happy? What's going to make me happy? Who am I? Am I the person that other people are making me? Or, you know, who is the real Chrissy? And I think talking to women, other women my age, we all go through that at a certain stage. It's sometimes it's in our 40s, sometimes it's when our kids leave home, but we do. And so I feel a real affinity with these characters already, Nikki. And that whole idea, I feel like the book may be a bit like that film Sliding Doors. You know, I love that idea that you can, at pivotal moments in your life, you know, you make a decision and you either go through that door or that door, or go down this path, and then sometimes the path leads to nothing, or the door leads to something awful, you know, and you turn around and think, if I'd have gone through the other door, what would have happened? But I always think that, you know, when you can look back on your life and you can, you know, but at the time I think you have to realize, this is one of the things I learned, when you make certain decisions, sometimes you make them in the time that they were then, you know, and it's very good. Hindsight is a great thing.
You can't change them. You can't change them.
But I think we do, you know, when we get to a certain stage in life. And I think for women it is sort of in your 50s, maybe when your kids leave home, or you become a grandma for the first time, or, you know, and you actually you can look back on who you were. I mean, I look at myself in my 20s and I think, my God, you know, that idiot teenager, you know, who had all these fears and stuff, you know, and we change all the time, don't we, as we go through life. So that's why I think I'm definitely going to have to read your book.
Good. Well, I hope you enjoy it. And for me, the most important thing is that people, I love the feedback. I love to know whether people have got what I was trying to get across to them. I wanted to write something that was relatively easy to read, so I didn't want to make it sort of challenging to read and difficult and, you know, kind of pretentious, because there is some writing like that out there. So I wanted it to be entertaining, easy to read, but I wanted to leave people thinking. I wanted to kind of set those questions up in their minds. And so many people have said, oh my goodness, I got to the end, I'm going to have to read it again, because I'm sure there's things I missed, or I keep thinking about the characters, or I keep thinking about those questions. So that's exactly what I wanted. So I'm really pleased that's the reaction I'm getting.
That's an amazing reaction, because I think, you know, if you do want it, because I think it's like when you watch a film for the first time, and sometimes you're watching it just for the storyline, and then, you know, you want to go back and watch it or read a book again to then get the, you know, the layers. You're trying to peel back the layers of what the writer has done, you know, because a lot of the time, it's the story that carries us through the first time. But somebody always said to me that somebody said something about the anticipation of reading a book the second time is that's the excitement, is you actually know what's going to happen in the plot, but then you can see how, you know, how the authors made that happen together. And I love that concept. So I think I'm going to love this book, Nikki. I should have bought it really and read it before.
I really hope you do. So yeah, I mean, we could talk a bit more about the book and the characters, but I was going to say, you said something there that made me think. There's a book that I read when I was younger, and I'm probably skipping about a bit here, so we can go back to it later. But there's a book I read when I was younger. I've read probably about 3 or 4 times now. And between the first and second time, I forgot what happened at the end. I remembered I loved the book so much, but I forgot what the ending was. So it was brilliant because I actually knew I loved it and I didn't remember. So it was even better. And that was my favourite book of all time, which is Rebecca by Daphne Du Maurier.
Wow. And we will be talking about that.
Yeah, but it's that moment you say about that rereading and those layers, you know, there is a place for a book that just entertains you. You can switch off, and you know, you can read it on the beach and you just think, oh, that was nice, and you never remember what happened. There is a place for that kind of book, but this isn't that kind of book. Well, that's it.
So when, I mean, I as we said, you know, books evolve and they are almost like a child, you know, they're conceived in your head and then you bring that child alive, and eventually there comes a day when, you know, you've got your book published and that box arrives on your doorstep with your book, with, you know, your words in it. How did that feel to open that box and literally, you know, hold your book, smell it, touch it, feel it, you know, actually have it there as a living thing?
It was amazing. By that time I'd learned a little bit about book marketing, so I didn't just do it straight away. I filmed it whilst I was doing it. So
great stuff. Yeah, do the unboxing.
You were getting my reaction real time in it.
Wow. Is there a video where I can see that somewhere? Is that on your website?
Will try. I'll send it to you.
I'd love to see the actual real time reaction of what it feels like to, you know, have done it. This must have been thinking, this is it. This is my book.
I know, it was amazing. Funny enough, I was out at a networking group that I belonged to at the time, and I knew it was due, and I was thinking, oh no, what happens if it has to get sent back to the depot because I'm not there? But they very naughtily, but also I was quite glad they did this, left it outside the house. So I had my boxes. So that wasn't so good. But anyway, so it was an amazing feeling because I think this is the thing to say to people if they are thinking about writing a book. And one of the most important things you need to do once you've written it, we've said get it out. That's important. Once you've done that, you've got to think, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want from it? So if it's just to share with your family, that's one thing. If it's, oh no, actually now I feel like it's got a bigger message, I want to go bigger with it, how are you going to do that? And you have to think, okay, do I want it to be made into a TV, you know, series or a film? Is it going to be a bestseller? You know, what am I trying to achieve? What's my real goal for this? And I always knew I did want it to go big, but more important than that, I wanted to see the book on a bookshelf in a bookshop. Now, there are less and less bookshops around, so that's quite a hard thing to do. It's very difficult to get into the likes of a Waterstones window unless you've got, you know, one of the big 5 publishers and a big marketing budget and all of that stuff. But to me, it was just literally about knowing somebody could go into a shop and buy it and take it home with them. That was what I was hoping for. So opening it and having a physical book, the way to do that is to get a publisher rather than doing it self-published. There's absolutely nothing wrong with self-publishing. You make more money doing that. But for me, it was that feeling of knowing I've got a physical book that was important to me. So then seeing it in our local bookshop and on a shelf and being showcased there, and then being invited to be their first author to speak. It's a beautiful bookshop called Books on the Hill, St Albans, and they'd literally just opened a couple of months after my book came out, and then I did a sort of a talk for them in the January following that. That was just a bit surreal. It's like I'm the one doing the talking, because I used to go to these things and listen to authors talking. So all I would say is there's no difference between people who've done it and you, except you've just got to keep going. You've just got to work out what you're trying to achieve and just be persistent and keep going.
So would you say then, because one of my questions was going to be sort of what life skills or personal qualities, you know, do you what personal qualities and life skills do you think, you know, a successful writer should have? And I think one of them you touched on is definitely perseverance. I
Yes.
would say self-belief. Believe you can
Yeah.
do it, and you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
If you don't believe you can do it, nobody else is going to believe
Yeah.
in you. So is there any other life skills or kind of personal qualities
Yeah.
you could add to that, you know, most
Definitely.
successful writers seem to
I
have?
mean, I did a survey, actually, exactly that question I asked in the writers group, and I said, what are the 3 most important attributes of a successful writer? And this survey, it was a bit of a straw poll, it wasn't like a scientific survey, but I got a lot of responses and a lot of common answers. And when I did the analysis, the top 3 were, it was really surprising, the top 3 were, third was creativity. And you'd think, well, that would have to be the top one, or talent, or whatever you want to call it. But no, that wasn't the most important one. And then second was actually doing it, sitting down and writing, you know, having the discipline to do that. And yeah, you kind of get, well, yeah, I understand why that would be perhaps number 2, but twice as popular as that one was perseverance. So that determination and perseverance to just keep on going. And the reason is you need it at every stage. You need it to keep getting the words out. You need to do it when you're editing. You need it when you're pitching to publishers or agents, and you'll get a lot of rejection. Once it's out there, you might not sell as many as you want to, or people might not like it. You have to deal with that, and you have to keep going, because at some point, if you keep going, you'll have that success. And I was chatting to Sue Moorcroft, who's a Sunday Times bestseller, in my author showcase that I do every week in my group. And she basically said, she talks about it as being her 20 years worth of effort to an overnight success, because nobody ever sees that bit before. They only see the big headlines. Oh my goodness, this person, we didn't know them before, and now we know, and everyone knows about them. But it's actually all the work that's gone in before that. So keeping on going, yes, you have to obviously have that self-belief. So I do talk about the 3 Ps. I don't know whether you might want to take this away with you. So the first P is that perception, which is the same thing as self-belief. You have to have the right perception of yourself to be able to make it happen. You have to see yourself as a business person as well, because at the end of the day, you've got to sell the book.
Absolutely.
Practice. So when you start writing, your writing later on will be better than the writing you did at the beginning, but it doesn't matter, because you're going to edit it anyway. So you just keep on going. So practice, and the more you write, the better you get. The more, actually, the happier you are to receive feedback, because if you get feedback and at the beginning you're a bit sort of, oh my god, that might put me off, but actually if somebody gives me feedback, I want to know what doesn't work for you, why doesn't it work, so I can make it better next time. That's the whole point. And that perseverance as well. So those 3 Ps, I think, are the answer to your question.
That's brilliant. So for anybody who's listening or watching and has had this idea for a book, then use this advice from Nikki. Use those P's, perseverance, and just stick at it. And so I found sometimes I would not work on it for a few weeks, and I'd have to go away and leave things to sort of and then I'd always come back to it, and I always it's the same with the Hidden Her stories. Started that. It was a good idea, the concept was there, but I didn't really have the money to put into it. Now I have, and it was on the back shelf, and I thought, no, it can be better, it can evolve, it can be revised. So I think
it's a brilliant idea. Absolutely brilliant.
It always has been. Trouble is, there's so many other people doing it now, but there's quite a lot of people doing it, and the idea I had for writing a book that people have already done, but what I think I've said to somebody else, the nice thing is that everybody has their own little niche or angle that they're coming in, or discovering these stories or writing them in. And I'm even now, as the new website is developing, I'm not just sort of writing these stories, I'm also producing little videos which plays to my photography strengths in the past. And I always think, as an ex-teacher, some people are visual learners, some people like reading, some people like listening. So with the podcast, trying to tell these stories in different ways, and everybody is, and when you find your little niche, and you've got something to hook all these stories onto, then it's great. So Nikki, I mean, as we've spoken, it's never too late to become or be the person you want to be. You've done it, and very, very successfully, because Pivotal was your debut novel, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
And it did actually reach the finals of the People's Book Prize and the Page Turner Book Awards in 2020. So I mean, that's an amazing achievement. You've done it. But the quote that we said was actually from one of your favourite authors, which is George Eliot, if people were guessing where that quote came from. And I love George Eliot. I mean, I think I discovered her books when I was in my 20s, I think, because and I came from a working class background, for people who don't know, and I sort of ended up going to university when I was in my 30s, but I became a mum when I was in my 20s, and I'd always wanted, I'd loved reading, a bit like you. I think my mum taught me to read before I could go to school, and I started reading classic books because my grandmother just used to hand me, she loved books, and she used to hand me these old dusty old books and say, read that, and I'd go home and it'd be Dickens or something like that, and I'd be like 8 years old. But when I became a mum and I was busy, and I stopped reading, and I actually, one of the things when I had my son, I'd had 2 children, and I just thought, I don't want to, my brain was becoming numb with baby clubs and nappies, so I ended up buying all these classic books, and every night when the kids would go to bed, I would read one of these classic books, and that's when I think discovered George Eliot. I think it was The Mill on the Floss was the first book of hers I read, and then Middlemarch, and quite a few, quite a few others that I read when I was doing my degree. But I think she was the first one that really, as an author, made me think about. It was her and the Bronte sisters, and when I read that they'd actually published under a male pseudonym like George Eliot, I thought it was a man, like a lot of people, I didn't know. And the Brontes were publishing under the name of Currer, and I thought, well, why did women feel that they had to put a man's name on this book? And that's when I sort of started to look into history and realized how much women have been oppressed, and so the whole George Eliot was really, really a key author with me, and I studied quite a lot of her stuff, like when I was at university, and I think Middlemarch was actually when they did the TV series of Middlemarch, and I remember I just thought the character of Dorothea Brooke was just, she was such an amazing woman. She wanted to be educated, and she was such a stifled woman, and that's basically what Victorian women were like, wasn't it? So George Eliot really, for me, and she was such an, when I found out about her life, for those people who don't know, I mean, she wasn't classically beautiful. She was, I always imagined sort of her like a bit like sort of Miranda Hart sort of stature. She was quite a big stout lady, and she had quite a sort of long face. She wasn't classically beautiful, so that, and I think that's why her father sort of said, oh well, you can, because you're not likely to get married, I might as well educate you. And she was lucky really, because she actually had the education that Dorothea Brooke, one of her characters, wanted and craved. But I think and then I found out that she actually lived with a gentleman who was married to somebody else, which was really scandalous at the time. And then I think she married somebody later in life who was like her toy boy. So I remember just thinking, George Eliot, she's just such a real amazing woman,
and trailblazer, really
kind of she just and actually I mean all the scandal in her personal life actually didn't really affect her writing at all. And that's what surprised me. Although she was pillarized in polite society, and not they weren't in her adulterous lover weren't invited to the parties with all the other literary figures. They did have a lot of people who were radical that were around them at the time, and they were kind of cushioned by that, and they were but they were ostracized by family members, I know. So what is it about George Eliot that how did she inspire you as a writer?
Well,
this trailblazing woman.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I think, I mean, I didn't know too much about her personal life at all. I obviously already knew that it was a pseudonym. So that in itself, even if you've never read any of her books, you just think, okay, that's quite savvy, really. She shouldn't have had to do it, but she wants to make her dream happen, and so she just found the way to make it happen. So I think that's quite inspiring in itself. But funnily enough, it's actually the quote that we talked about, that it's never too late to be who you might have been. And I came to it from the coaching angle. I found that quote, thought that is what I'm trying to do for people, or with people. And then I did some more research and found out that there's no actual evidence that she said it or wrote it. But it's been attributed to her so many times that whenever I say allegedly, because I don't know if she didn't do it. But in essence, it sums up everything about her way of life and her belief that you should just go and do it anyway. And I used to think, when I was a small girl, I used to think, I'm really glad I didn't live then, because I knew I had that spirit inside me, and I was very, very lucky. My parents never made me think that I was any different to my brother or my sister. They just said, look, go and do your thing and do it well, and you know, you'll be fine. And I didn't even think about there being any difference between boys and girls ever until much later on. And then I realized, actually, there are some things we don't get to do, or find it harder to do because of the way society is set up. But I guess I think actually it's her lyricism. I mean, she was a poet as well, and I started out as a poet when I was a child. I've still got all my poetry in the loft somewhere. I've loved words since I could speak and write and read. So like you, before school. So. I think it was a combination of her own life in the way she wrote about her characters came through. So even if you didn't know about her personal life, those stories that she wrote were trying to say something to us about how women should be able to go and do the things that they're capable of doing. And I think that's probably why she's one of my heroines.
And she was a realist, wasn't she, in her novels, really? And
I like that essay. She wrote that essay, didn't she?
That's the one. Any novels for women?
Novelists.
That's it. I'm just trying to find it on my notes here. But yes, she wrote, because a lot of the books that were written in that time were kind of, you know, they were very light and fluffy. And when you read George Eliot, I mean, they all have amazing plots and characters and everything. You know, the plot is interesting in itself, but there's also lots of sort of quite radical political messages within there about the education of women, about, you know, the class system, and she, because she was, I mean, she had a lot of influential friends, didn't she, who were sort of involved in politics. I'm looking at my notes here, but Herbert Spencer and Harriet Martineau and Ralph Waldo Emerson were people that, you know, she met through friends of hers, and she was very, very into, I mean, very much into radical sort of politics, and she wrote for she wrote magazine articles, and she was very, very sort of clued up. That's why I love her, because she was just so far ahead of her time, and you know, she just didn't seem to care what people thought. She did things from the heart, didn't she? You know, I think as a person.
And it's interesting you mentioned Ralph Waldo Emerson there, because again, quotes obviously do speak to me for some reason, because I didn't know anything about him. I know we're talking about women's history here, but just for a second.
No, that's okay.
I was in my son's support worker's office. We were talking about a program of putting in some support for him. This was when he was in primary school, and she had a poster on the wall, and it had a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it said, "Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm." And when I was, throughout my whole sort of schooling, people would always say in my report, "Oh, Nikki's really, really enthusiastic," and I always saw it as a negative thing, because I thought, "Oh, they're saying that because, well, she's trying really hard," you know, that connotation. And then when I saw that quote, I thought, "Oh, it's okay. I can just be me. I can be enthusiastic and be positive, be optimistic. It's okay." And actually, if you've got that passion for something, you don't have, I mean, not everyone has to be extrovert, of course, But if you have got that passion for something, then it will help drive you through. You'll get there with that, you know, on the back of that passion. So yeah, anyway, that was a bit of an aside. Sorry.
No, that's great. I'm going to move you on now. Because we've got 3 women to talk about, and I will be sort of putting a potted sort of biography of George Eliot on with the blog post as well. So if people want to find out more about her, they can. If you've not heard of her books, you know, go out and pick up The Mill on the Floss or Middlemarch and dip into a bit of George Eliot. But the next author we're going to talk about, you mentioned briefly before, is Daphne Du Maurier, and I think most people will probably know of some of her most famous novels, Rebecca, Jamaica Inn, and I think she actually wrote The Birds, which it was made into a Alfred Hitchcock film. So why is Daphne Du Maurier on your sort of one of your inspirational women?
I think probably because at the time when I read her, I was reading anything and everything I could from the library. I got to a point where we couldn't afford to buy all the books that I needed to sort of satisfy my reading habit. And I'd also got past that thing of, I can only read a book if I know who the author is thing, because I used to do that. I used to go, I don't want to risk reading something someone I don't know, or if I don't like it. So I was reading everything and anything, and the first one I read was Rebecca. I'm glad it was, because it is an amazing book. And actually, I don't even care whether it was supposedly a classic book or not. For me, it's just the best story, the plot, the description. Nowadays, it's not very popular to have lots of description in your writing, but I do. I mean, I don't have lots, but I have more than most would suggest. But to me, creating a world through the words that you're writing is an amazing thing to be able to do. And obviously, because she lived in Cornwall, most of her books are set there, and it's all very atmospheric and a little bit, you know, certainly Rebecca's got this sinister thing pulling you through all the story.
It has. A lot of her books kind of sort of verge on that, you know, sinister, paranormal. I actually watched, there was a remake of the film of Rebecca, and I watched that a few months ago. And for people who don't know, I think the brief plot is that there's a man who's been married before, has a new wife, brings his new wife to this large house which is staffed by a housekeeper, and the new wife just feels that the old wife is still there, there's lots of other things, but that's the sort of premise of the story, isn't it? And it is. I mean, it's a psychological kind of, it's one of what I would call one of the first psychological sort of thrillers that was written by a woman, because it's not what you see, it's what you don't see, it's what's going on in Rebecca's head. That is the scary thing, isn't it, really? Not the actual, the house feels menacing, and you know, and the housekeeper is a, you know, amazing character in it, but really it's the way that the mind works. And I think I haven't read many of Du Maurier's work. Again, I'm sort of more interested in her life, but she did actually become quite reclusive, didn't she?
She did. The more famous she became. But there is a BBC documentary, if anyone's interested, there's a BBC documentary on her, still on BBC iPlayer.
Oh, amazing.
It's about 40 minutes long. It's when she was, I think she was probably in her 70s at that time when she was being interviewed, so it was a rare interview with her. And I watched that a few years ago, and I just thought, oh wow. My other story of hers that I like is not The Birds so much, but it's Don't Look Now, which is a short story, and obviously the film it's been on recently with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, which is, it's sort of set in Venice. And I mean, I wouldn't recommend watching it if you're going to Venice, because you'll feel a little bit spooked out when you're going through the streets at night. But it is such a good, I mean, again, it's another psychological thing, but it's literally a 29-page story that they made into this film. And what's really good about that writing is it's the whole thing about short stories, which I haven't mastered yet because I'm trying to write short stories as well, is there's no room for any spare words at all.
Yes.
So when you read it, it's almost like it's too simple. You know, you think, well, hang on a minute, I could write better than this. But it's not about showing off with your words. It's about getting the story and the essence of the story and the characters down and out onto paper. So she was just prolific as well. She wrote loads and loads of stuff. And I just think, I imagined when I first thought I might write a book, which was when I was in my 20s, and I didn't get round to it until much later, until I was in my mid-40s I started writing. I imagined life as a writer to be like her life as a writer, and it isn't like that. Not really. For most of us it's not like that, but I just thought, again, I mean, here's a woman who probably shouldn't have been as bold as she was, you know, and believed in herself as much as she did, and been as successful as she was. She shouldn't have been able to, because again, she was born in the early, well, before the First World War, wasn't she?
Yes, she was.
Something. Was it 1907 or something? So
I'm just trying to look it up to clarify. But I actually found something really interesting about her, and as I was sort of researching for this, and it was almost, she was very much a tomboy, and she sort of she grew up being a tomboy because apparently her father really wanted to have a son. And but she felt that she said that she had like two different personas, and that there was the sort of the feminine side of her, you know, there was two distinct people. There was Daphne Du Maurier, the loving wife and mother, and the side that she showed to the world, and there was the lover, and the writer was more of a decidedly like male energy. And this was what propelled her writing. But there was I think after she died as well, I found really interesting that some people were sort of hinting that she may have been bisexual. She may have had a relationship with Gertrude Lawrence, the actress, but there's no sort of, you know, there's no evidence of this. But and so, you know, it always makes me think that I think there's a masculine and feminine side to all of us. And for women, you know, if you are persistent, if you are kind of like, you know, that woman that goes out there and gets things done, or if you're a ball breaker in the corporate world, you know, the men always seem to see that as like that's male characteristics, and they're not feminine characteristics. And I think it's interesting that, you know, that she felt in order to be a writer, or to feel comfortable, you know, there was this secret sort of self that was much more masculine, but she felt that she had to put this feminine front out to the world. But it's the masculine, that determination, that got those books written. And her books, I think Rebecca sold 3 million. You know, that's your blockbuster, isn't it? You know, you've made it if you've done that.
Absolutely. It stands up now as well. It's still just as good now as it was then. You know, and she was just such an amazing writer, like with that the mystery and again, somebody who I think was like quite ahead of her time. As a female writer, she was writing you know, in a style as well, which, you know, wasn't, I think, and if I'm correct, not many of her books actually have a female narrator either, do they? I think a lot of them are men, and you know, she's a woman writing more from that male perspective. So I just found that really interesting. Isn't there a scene in your book as well? I think I remember there was that is similar to Rebecca, about going up a path. There is, just tell us a little bit about that scene, and how Rebecca maybe how that came about. Well, I can't, when I'm writing, I can't sort of switch off bits of me. And I should get this name nailed. I'm not very good with names, I have to say. I apologize. There's an author, and I think it might be Carol Ann Duffy, but don't quote me on that. But I heard her being interviewed on the radio, and she said, when they asked her, you know, where do your ideas come from? Everyone always asks that question. She said, well, look, put it this way. Everything that's in my life at the time I'm writing a book gets hoovered up and ends in there somewhere. And that is exactly what it's like for me. When I'm writing anything I'm interested in, even though it's not me in the book, it's me writing it. So I'm in the book. Anyway, so of course I love Rebecca. I didn't intend for this to happen, but I was writing, in my story there is a house, and in Rebecca there's a house, and it has its own character, you know.
Yes.
In books these things do, and it's the one that's bequested to the four main characters, and they've got to decide whether they take it or don't take it, and there's lots of strings attached, so it's not as simple as, oh yeah, great, I'll take that house, thanks very much. But one of the characters is approaching, for the first time, is approaching the house, and she's meeting somebody there that they've prearranged, and so she's got to find her way through to the house, and that's basically the beginning of Rebecca, is exactly that premise, that the second Mrs. De Winter is finding a way, and it's in a dream, and anyway, so I didn't mean for it to happen, but as I was writing I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is a bit similar. So I actually, in the book, I reference it. I thought, well, there's no point in pretending that it's come from nowhere. I'm not making this up. Obviously, the writing is different, and the words are different, and the feeling I'm trying to create is different, because it's not sinister at all. But yeah, the character says, I feel like the second Mrs. De Winter, you know, in the opening of the book, because I mean, not that many people would necessarily know that, but if they know Rebecca and they know Daphne Du Maurier, they would know that. So it found its way in there somewhere.
No, I think that's amazing, because we are, you know, you're referencing other writers, and that, you know, that particular scene suddenly came into your head, and you were able to do something with that scene and make it yours, and but reference that. So I think that's amazing. Now I'm gonna bring us on to our third lady, or woman writer, before we wrap up this brilliant podcast chat today. And when you said the name of this lady, I didn't actually connect, but I remember watching The Chamomile Lawn, which was on the TV quite a few years ago, but I didn't connect with who the writer was. And as I was doing some research this afternoon, I just thought, wow, you know, I must go and read some Mary Wesley now, because Mary Wesley really, I mean, she didn't start writing books until she was quite old, but one of I found some lovely sort of quotes and things. And one of the things that really sort of made me realize sort of what sort of person she was, and she was really out there, wasn't she, Nikki?
She was,
but apparently when, as a child, she had 16 governesses while she was growing up, and she asked her mother why the governesses kept leaving, and her mother reportedly told her, because none of them like you, darling. And I just thought, I wonder, you know, so she came from this family that were, you know, really
dysfunctional,
very, very dysfunctional. Her mother had a particularly sharp tongue. And her, you know, and again, there was this quote that her mother apparently said after the death of her father: "I'm not going to let a lingering death happen to me. When the time comes, I'm going to crawl to the Solent and swim out." And Mary Wesley replied with feeling, "Well, in that case, I'll help you." So she obviously didn't get on with her mum, and there was this jarring, and also, you know, her books. Her brother apparently called what she wrote filth. Her sister, she was no longer on speaking terms to. And some of the characters apparently in The Chamomile Lawn were, you know, supposedly based on her parents. She married 3 times, I believe, and it was particularly, I think it was only after the death of her third husband in 1970 that she was left quite poor, and that's when she decided to become an author as a way of restoring her finances. So I mean, you know, I haven't read any of her books. I've seen The Chamomile Lawn, and it was a really good costume drama. But Nikki, please, like, tell me a bit more about Mary Wesley, because she really is the epitome of you're never too old to be the person you want to become.
Yeah, she was in my mind. So I talked about thinking of writing a novel when I was in my 20s. I had the strand, I had the idea for the beginning, a few paragraphs at the beginning of a book I wrote, and sort of 3 or 4 character profiles I wrote down, and I just kept that, and I didn't do anything with it. And one of the strands in Pivotal is that one strand. But I thought to myself at the time, I don't know enough about writing. I don't know about life, actually. I'm just going to put this one aside. I'm just going to carry on reading. And that was when I was reading Mary Wesley. I was reading also Freya North. I was reading prolifically. I didn't have any kids at the time. I didn't have any other responsibilities. But anyway, so she, as you say, she published her first novel when she was 70. And I just thought that was amazing. And I bought every single one of it. She wrote 10 bestsellers from the age of 70 to when she stopped writing. And what was lovely about the books was that she doesn't use words where you don't need them. So she's a bit like Daphne Du Maurier in that. She's very quirky. She didn't care about what people thought about what her writing was, and obviously she fell out with her siblings, but basically she had always been quite a bold, sexy woman from when she was a young woman all the way through. And I just thought, wow, someone in their 70s is obviously writing about her era when she was young. She was writing mostly stories set in World War II.
That's right.
Which was when she was young. But she's a person, and she still has all those feelings and thoughts and carries that with her. And isn't that fantastic? And I used to I'd buy them and then I'd share them with my mum. My mum would share her books with me and I would share them with her. And we were both big fans of Mary Wesley. And to the point where there's very few people I'd buy a hardback from. But the first one I didn't, because I didn't, the first two I think maybe that I bought, and then thereafter I'd wait every time for a new book to come out and I'd buy it as a hardback, and I've got probably 7 out of the 10 I've got in hardback. So there wasn't one single book that I didn't enjoy. They're not all the same. That's the other thing I think about her that's really great. She wrote about different aspects of, mainly the themes being dysfunctional families, wartime, the feeling of frivolity and the freedom that post-war, for young people. But her writing style is just so funny. It's so, again, I guess a little bit sort of feminist in the sense that she just thinks, well, I don't really care if women are meant to be, quiet and demure and whatever. That's not me. I'm not going to do that. And so her characters don't necessarily do that. So yeah, she's an inspiration, because at that time I thought, well, I do want to write a book, and it's okay, I'll be fine. She will, if she can do it when she's 70, I've got plenty of time.
Excuse me a moment.
No worries. So yeah, it gave me hope that it didn't matter if I wasn't quite ready yet to start writing, because she'd started so late in life and been successful. So yeah, she's always been there as my sort of my guiding light, as it were.
She is the perfect example, though, isn't it? I mean, to start writing, to do anything, to start something when you're in your 70s is amazing, I wonder whether all this stuff, all this writing had been in her. But it was the situation, the fact that she needed some money, and she thought, well, I'm going to actually do it to earn some money now. She probably wrote a lot for pleasure, and never even maybe didn't have to. But I think, well, I have to say, Nikki, the three women that you've chosen today have been a brilliant start to this series. And I mean, it's this series is all about me speaking to inspirational women of the present, which is yourself, because you've been really inspirational to me. I'm sure that people out there today who are thinking, I'd love to write a book, you're inspiration. You're going to be inspirational for them. And if people want to come and join you on Facebook, you run author and book live sessions in the week. They can find you on Facebook if they just search for Nikki Vallance, can't they? And your website is nikkivallance.com. So if people want to come and can they buy a copy of the book via your website? Is there links on there for Amazon?
They've got all the options they like. They can have signed copies directly from me, which are slightly more expensive because I've got to kind of ship them out. But you've
got to write on them and put things in the message and everything, and that's all time.
They always get a few goodies from me as well, because I've got bookmarks and postcards and things as well, because the cover's so beautiful that I thought, well, I might as well have some merch.
It is beautiful. Who actually did the artwork? Where was that?
My publishers found a cover designer, and then because they're a small publisher, I was actually very privileged to have input to it, so I could say what I was really wanting it to represent and what I didn't.
So what do the rainbow colours and the splashes represent?
Well, there are sort of mostly 4 colours there, 4 main colours, and the 4 characters of the 4 strands of the story that if you look, obviously there's a pivotal, there's a swirl, and it comes to a point, and so it's the 4 different aspects of these characters and the story coming together. But the reason we did an abstract cover is because I didn't want it to look like or be like a sort of frivolous, light-hearted story with cartoon figures on it, because that didn't really represent what the story was. But on the other hand, it makes it very hard for people to know what the story is. So it's kind of, it's double-edged sword, because
it's intriguing,
really
and it's very colourful, it's very eye-catching, and I can picture it in Waterstones or in a bookshop. It would draw the eye. But I'm going to have to wrap up our interview today, because I'm really trying to keep these to like 1 hour. It's been fabulous speaking to you, and as I said, you are an inspiring woman. What you've done is inspiring. You've written that book, and the ladies and the women that you've spoken to us today, George Eliot, Daphne Du Maurier and Mary Wesley, are all, you know, fantastic subjects. So thank you so much, Nikki, for
no problem at all. It's been lovely being with you.
I hope people will go out and buy the book, and I hope people will, because also, you know, that Nikki's coaching, she is still doing it. If you're an aspiring writer, or even if you've written a book and you want help to go on and write something else, you do courses, which I think there's one called the Debut, there's one called the Blockbuster. Depending on where you're at in your writing career, Nikki can offer advice at all levels. So, you know, if you are struggling, if you really and you've heard her advice today, it's no nonsense, like Daphne Du Maurier's writing, and you know what, Nikki's the proof of the pudding. She's done it, so she's the best person to guide you through that writing process. So please, if you're listening today and you're an aspiring writer, just go and find Nikki she's on Instagram as well, she's on Twitter, she's on Facebook, and you can connect with her. She does these wonderful live sessions, which hopefully I'm going to come and do one for you at the beginning of next year. So, you know, that's all free, and her advice is out there. And then if you decide that you want to have some coaching with Nikki, personal one-to-one coaching, and, you know, investing in yourself, I think from personal experience is one of the best things you can do. You know, we need to look after ourselves in mind, body and health, and you know, if you invest in that coaching for whatever you feel you need at the time, I think it's, you know, it's money well spent, because you are getting, you know, they're getting an expert view from somebody who's done it. And it was never too late for you, was it, Nikki? And it's not too late for me, so, you know, that quote, it's never too late for anybody to do anything and follow your dreams. You just have to believe in yourself and have that perseverance. So Nikki, you've done it, and I take my hat off to you. Thank you so much for being a guest today. And we look forward to, you know, more books from you, Nikki, and perhaps more chats with you when you're a best-selling author. You know, don't forget that you came and chatted to us.
Of course.
Because you are, you know, I'm sure your books, I'm going to buy a copy of your book for my little treat for Christmas on my Kindle. So, because I really want to read it now, and we might do a review and whatever. But thank you for being here.
No worries.
I look forward to coming and guesting on your authors and on your Facebook page in January.
Yeah, fantastic.
So take care, Nikki.
You too.
And just plug your website again. One more plug for the book.
It's nikkivallance.com.
That's it, guys. Go and visit Nikki's website, and thank you very much for listening, watching today. Hope you have a good day, whatever you're doing. And just remember, you're never too old to be the person that you want to be.